They are one of the giants. They were one of the giants up here. They have so many different mills up here. We have Canfor Theater just behind us right here.
Yeah.
They have swimming pools, and they established a lot of like the operation procedures and how things is done around here. And a lot of like smaller mills kind of follow Canfor's model, and then kind of your plan of how to attack those areas, because Canfor couldn't figure out a way to do it. I'm really interested in like your plan to how to tackle those problems, if you don't mind. Welcome to the UNBC Forestry Club Podcast. This podcast is recorded at the C4 radio station on campus from the traditional unceded territory of Lheidli-T'enneh. You're probably listening from other places in BC or Canada or maybe around the world. We encourage you to recognize the traditional territory you get to learn, play, and live on. All right, welcome back to UNBC Forestry Club Podcast. I'm your host, Hunda. Today we have a really special episode prepared for you because the big boss, the founder, and the CEO of Brink Forest Products, John Brink, is with us today. And his company specializes in finger-jointed lumber, supporting 400 direct jobs across PG, Vanderhoof, and Huston areas. He's the man behind the biggest secondary lumber manufacturer in Canada. He has a podcast YouTube channel, which has more than 656,000 subscribers. And the episode talking about the BC forest industry in crisis has more than 527,000 views just for one videos. And this year, Canfor announced the suspension of its planned reinvestment in its closed Huston mills and a permanent shutdown of its sawmill at Bear Lake, Fort St. John, and Vanderhoof, impacting about 700 jobs and 1,000 million board feet of annual production. But this man sitting across me at the table, he got a plan to purchase them all. And today, we're really honored to have him to discuss the value-added business and his plan to purchase those mills and keep people employed. So, John, I know you're really busy. I just want to thank you for coming and really welcome you to our podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ande. I'm glad to be here, at your podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate this. So we also have Jack and Adam from our Forestry Club joining us today for discussions. Hello. So you guys just chip in for any questions that you want. But for all the guests that join us, we definitely want to learn a little about you, your histories and whatnot. I know you've been rolling in the trenches of the forestry industry for a while, hey?
Yeah, I would say, let me give you some background. I was born in Holland in 1940, so I turned 84 a couple of weeks ago here.
84?
84 years young, yeah.
Wow.
And
you look great right
Well, thank you. and so already, if you look at the date, that it's obvious that was just before the Second World War started in Holland and in Western Europe and all of Europe. And so it was a tough go. And obviously, I still remember parts of the war years that had an impact on me. Saw far too much that we should not have seen.
Right.
But as a little boy, 5 years old, we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, as part of the Allied forces that liberated or that landed in Normandy. The Canadians were the ones that landed, went through France, Belgium, then the western part of Holland, and then pushed the German armies out of the backside of Holland in the north. That's where I was born,
right.
10 or 15 minutes from the border. So we saw far too much that we should not have seen, as I said. It was April the 12th, 1945, that the Canadians liberated us. It made such an impression on me as a 5-year-old that I always knew I would go, when I grew up, to the land of my heroes, Canada. And it took me quite a while to do that.
Right.
I was going to go when I was 17, was drafted into the Dutch Army. My parents said, you're too young, and I was actually drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years. That was mandatory then. And then worked in the lumber industry then for a couple of years in Holland, had some exposure to Sweden. My grandfather was a master carpenter, and my dad worked in the forest industry in Holland. And so being part of the forest industry was always part of me. The other part is academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And they said, well, what are we going to do with this guy? So sent him to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not going to do that. Let's teach him a trade. So at 13, I started in a lumber or in a furniture factory. And so I loved lumber and working with furniture. And in the evenings, I would go to the college and become a furniture maker. So that was already part of me then. And also in that process, before I left, I spent time working for the largest importer of lumber in Western Canada, in a company in Holland, but also spent some time in Sweden and in Central Europe. But Sweden impressed me very much. And so then I decided to go when I was 23, got an immigration permit to come as a landed immigrant to Canada. So I had another dream. I was going to build my own lumber mill. And so I wanted to start with nothing, very little. Couldn't speak language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I knew I wanted to go to British Columbia. That's where all the timber is. So I landed in Montreal, took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that's a long way. And those trains go so slow here compared to us
Still
in Europe.
pretty slow now.
Yeah, they are still pretty slow.
So in any event, I landed in Vancouver, went to the immigration office there. Fortunately, there was a German fella there, and I could speak some German. And I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a lumber mill. And he said, go to Prince George. That's where 1965, that's where they're building all the mills, the pulp mills, and it's a boom town. That's where the opportunities are. So I went on the bus to Prince George. The Greyhound station was here up till about a year ago, still downtown, and took 12 to 14 hours to take the Greyhound bus. Came off the bus here at the Greyhound station with my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. But I couldn't speak language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. And then I went to the immigration office here, which is above the post office, even still today. I don't know if the immigration office is there, but that's where it was then. Fortunately, it was during the summer, and there was a young fellow that, this was July, and he had a Dutch background, and so he could understand me. And so I wanted to get a job. And he said, well, when do you want to start? Well, obviously I had a cash flow issue. I said, as soon as I can, tonight. So he found me a job in Quesnel at Valwood of Canada. So I thought, okay, well, I'll take my suitcase, I go to the bus station, and every 20 minutes there is a bus, and that takes me to Quesnel. No, that's not how it works here. It was twice a day there was a bus. So I walked all the way to Highway 97 with my suitcase. Now you have to just realize I had gray pants, double-breasted jacket, a tie, white shirt, and then a rainy overcoat, 3/4, very modern European.
Yeah.
And so there this guy with the suitcase and his suit is standing by the highway hitchhiking. So a lot of people, they said, this guy, what's going on here? Anyway, so somebody picked me up, and he said, I couldn't speak the language, so other than, where do you want to go? And I said, Greyhound Station in Quesnel, because that's where I stopped before. And fortunately, we had made a phone call to a feller. Ernie McHattrick was his name. He was the personnel manager. He picked me up on the Greyhound Station and brought me to a place where I could be and board and room. That same evening, I went to the little sawmill in Valwood of Canada behind the plywood plant and started piling lumber. And my gray suit, black jacket, white shirt, tie. Now, there were about 300 people working in the plywood plant. So every single one of them came down and said, you cannot believe what we got. And they had this crazy guy in his suit is piling lumber off the green chain. So by the time the first coffee break came, I took my tie off and took my jacket off. But what they did not realize necessarily is that I was already building my sawmill in my mind. And it was years and years and years later that, as I was then the vice chair of the Council of Forest Industry, the big organization, we're standing there in a group of people talking about some Dutch thing of some sort, and this one guy says, yeah, at one time I have to tell you this, there was this crazy guy, and he was piling lumber, and I was just standing there and listening to these guys, and and oh my God, can you believe it? And wonder what happened to him, blah, blah, blah. And I said, it was me. So that became the story. Then I was there for a period of time, and then there was an opportunity in Prince George. I went there to, purely coincidental that you guys respectfully likely don't know. There was a mill here, probably one of the larger mills that was being built, called Netherlands Overseas. Purely coincidental. I didn't know anybody there. And so they hired me as a lumber pilot, and then from there, and then to me it was always going forward. I became a lumber pilot. I wanted to be the supervisor of the green chain. Then I became the supervisor of the sawmill back end of the manufacturing shift. And then I became a superintendent of the yard. So within a year and a half, I was superintendent of one of the largest sawmills in Prince George. But
where was that mill again, sorry?
Netherlands Overseas.
Is it in town?
In town, yeah. It's not here anymore,
Right.
although interesting when you ask the question. It had a big parcel of land in the BCR side. Part of the mill is still there. I own it now, actually.
Oh, cool.
On the side. That's the side where I used to sleep in a little cabin and walked to another story, but I used to walk all the way to the post office because there was supposed to be a check for me that came from Bellwood of Canada for $160 for 2 weeks' work, $2 per hour. And I would walk all the way there and all the way back because they promised me a job. But eventually I got the job, and then it didn't take very long, and I was a superintendent. But that didn't go fast enough for me. And then there was an opportunity to buy into a smaller sawmill, and I did that. And the conditions were, if I did that for 5 years, I then would buy a third or get a third of the ownership. So, John, where was the sawmill? Watson Lake, Yukon. Any of you ever been in Watson Lake, Yukon?
I have not.
I really wanted
You
to.
should go there. It's very, very nice, especially in the wintertime. It was 62 below. Coming from Holland, the difference between winter and summer is that usually in Holland is in the wintertime the rain is colder, not 62 below zero.
Yeah, for sure.
So I did that, and so I spent 5 years there. And so then came back, gave it all away. It's all in my book, actually, Against All Odds. I have a copy of the book here.
You wrote it?
That's my book, yeah.
Oh, cool.
I have 5 different books.
Oh, cool.
So we'll talk about the books a little bit.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
in any event, so then I came back to Prince George, again started working for the sawmill, became a cost accountant for them, then a superintendent again, and then I prepared, and I had lots of experience. So what I saw is an opportunity. All the timber was already controlled by others, and I did not have the resources to do that, but then because of my experience, being trained as a furniture maker, having spent time with one of the larger importers of lumber in Western Europe, I had learned a lot of things, and I already from a very young age wanted to become an entrepreneur and wanted to own my own company. So I was watching closely as what they did, where the opportunities were. So that's what I did here. I had to find a niche. The niche was value-added manufacturing, where I would buy low-grade lumber. Now, for those that are not familiar with lumber manufacturing, if you looked at a volume of 100%, then likely in most cases say that there may be at that point up to 10% low-grade lumber not suitable for construction. There'll probably be another 15% of number 3 or utility that is not used in structural application but in light framing issues or remanufacturing. And then above that are the dimension lumber that is used for building. And so there was really no market for the lower grades lumber, and I saw that as an opportunity. So I started as a lumber remanufacturing with 3 employees. I had no money, but I had a good business plan. And so I would go to every bank in town, was turned down by most of them, but then I kept a couple of banks were still interested, including one bank, the Royal Bank. And I would go to them and again present to them my business plan. Actually, the business plan is still, and employees that work around me that have seen my business plan, they said, I can't believe it. We still are doing that today, now 50 years later. Wow. And so what I would do then, prepare the business plan, go to the bank, and then again, they gave me some encouragement. The problem that I had is lack of equity. If I had lots of money, I had no money. I wanted to lend $25,000 to start a company. And so finally, again, I went to that bank, the Royal Bank, the one on Victoria Street, actually, even still today, is there. One of the managers there. So the fellow that I was dealing with, again, he said, I had made changes to my business plan. He said, let me take it to the manager. So you had to go 3 or 4 cubicles up the line.
Yeah.
And all the way from there, I am here, say, give him the money, give him the money. And so there I had my $25,000. That was the start of Brink Forest Products. 3 employees and myself working 24/7 as long as I could stay awake.
What year was this roughly?
1975.
And what's 25,000?
July 1975.
25,000 back in 1975 is what, like 100,000, a million, roughly?
Oh no, be
No?
not that bad. Maybe 100,000.
100,000?
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, but I had to be very innovative about it. I had to find something that in the first 3 months I lost $75,000, and every time a car would go by there, I would think, oh my God, that's the bank, and saying, okay, John, give me the keys. That but I didn't. It gradually started in the forming of Brink Forest Products. From that point forward, became a company, and then from an operational and from a corporate perspective, operated that for probably 30 years, and then started expanding into other areas. So today, if you look at the Brink group of companies, there are 4 silos. The one is lumber manufacturing and lumber remanufacturing in particular, including finger jointing. We have an operation in Prince George, one in Vanderhoof, one in Huston, BC. And then the other company is warehousing. We're probably the largest warehousing company in northern British Columbia. We do warehousing, distribution, and logistics. The other silo is real estate, both residential, commercial, and industrial. And then, again, being one of the largest ones, probably in the region, doing a fairly major commercial development at the end of North Nechako. Actually, it was a major shopping center, and probably 400 or 500 apartments that we're building there. The other silo is media. And in media, I do books. I'm working on my 6th book, actually. Wow. And then, obviously, I'm a very active podcaster. We globally top 1%, not only about right across the board on different issues, and it's on the Brink. Then the other one is I'm a presenter, keynote presenter in demand a lot of times, and and then obviously to write the books, and we have 10 different companies under that umbrella.
How do you have all these energy to do this?
Yeah.
You were at like 80.
So that is another one that I'm going to shock you is likely. I have, but what does it for me, I'm ADHD. And ADHD, I wrote a book about that, is a superpower.
Well,
It is.
we were talking about in the last podcast. We said I think the secret sauce of forestry is ADHD.
Many
Yeah.
forestry workers, we all have ADHD
Yeah,
for some reason. I have no idea why, but that's just my observation.
Can't sit still. you know?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
gotta be constantly moving.
Well, the just touching on ADHD for a minute is that I wrote a book about that, ADHD Unlocked, very popular actually, and then the interesting part about it, it took me till January 1997 that I picked up a book in the store here in Prince George, Driven to Distraction. I don't know why I picked it up, written by Dr. Halliwell, is that, and all of a sudden I started looking at it, and all of a sudden what became clear to me, the reason that I had difficulty with the traditional learning system is because that's why I failed grade 3, that's why I failed grade 7. I was very good with numbers. I was a very good writer, but I have also dyslexia, so ADHD and dyslexia combined. But and then I have a very, very good memory, and I'm a very good presenter, and so so that were the qualities of that. But the other part about it was that it took me till the time I was 57 until I realized that I was ADHD. Now, the other interesting part for the people watching and wondering about ADHD, Dr. Halliwell, who wrote the book, is a professor, has written 18 books, has dyslexia and ADHD.
Wow.
I had him on my podcast number 203, on the Brink. Podcast is available to anybody. Can see the interview with Dr. Halliwell. Now, during the interview, he's the expert, more so than, although I lived it, wrote a book about it, but it was unique that all those years later, when he wrote the book in 1993, I bought it in Prince George in 1997. I had him on my podcast in 2024, probably 2023. It was amazing. And so during our conversation, I suggested, at least in my mind, to him that I believe that probably 20% of the population, both male and female, different somewhat, are ADHD. He said, no, John, probably 25%. Now, the other one that comes to the point that you made earlier is that in all the years that I've been in business and active in the forest industry and boards of directors and all of that kind of stuff, be it a vice chair of coffee, blah, 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 I met a lot of successful business people. I suggested to Dr. Halliwell that I believe of the successful is the operative, successful business people that I met, probably 50% of them are ADHD. He said, no, John, 75%. I agree with him. And so the amazing part that you will find now, and Scott is sitting behind me, he's quite involved in the organization on the media side in particular, and watches a lot of my podcasting that I do. It is, even today I did a podcast, yesterday one, and probably the 3 podcasts that I did this week, I believe all of them, not by design, but conscientious. I don't know how it happened. I bring up the issue of ADHD and then find out that they are ADHD as well.
Wow.
So the frequency of occurrence is amazing. But it is, in my mind, and that's why I feel so strongly about speaking about it, writing about it, I believe it's a superpower.
It is.
For sure.
John, let me ask this question. You being working in the industry for this long, like, what's your observation for the whole industry from when you first get into it till now? Because we're as a community, we're in crisis, as he said.
It's a disaster.
Yeah. So what can you just briefly walk us through from when you first started as a industry around PG till now?
Yeah.
Please.
So let's say it this way. Hyundai. I just want
Honda.
Honda.
Yeah, it's a weird name.
Honda.
Yeah.
So, no, it's okay. Yeah, Honda. So I wanted to come to Canada and to BC in particular because I wanted to build a sawmill. BC is an amazing province, and it's paradise in my mind, and that's still how I feel today about it. In terms of the industry, is that the industry was booming at the time in the mid-'60s, especially in the northern interior. Separate the coast, different species, as you guys well know, and then the interior. The interior, if we go back a bit from when I came here in 1965, it was in transition. But it happened before, from the late 40s to the 50s, we used to have 800 sawmills around Prince George. But, 800. Those were small operations, 3, 4, 5, 6 people maybe in the operation. They would go to the bush and then cut rough lumber.
Mm-hmm.
What happened then with the rough lumber, they shipped it into Prince George to Plainer Road. You know where Plainer Road is?
No.
You know where River Road is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was called Plainer Road. And the reason that it was called Plainer Road, that's where all the planer mills were.
Mm.
And so why were they there? Well, because it was close to the river and it was close to the railroad. There was no PG railroad then, or PGR or BCR. So there was the CN, and so what that would happen is the small mills that were operating, they would take the rough lumber once a week into town on truckloads, and they negotiate prices with the different planers, and then they plane the lumber, and the planed lumber usually would be all put into a boxcar by hand, and all the grades would be together. And so that was the industry. Then the thing to remember also that the industry is relatively new here compared to the rest of the world in a lot of cases, especially Europe, Sweden, Central Europe, and all of those kind of places. So it was then also subject to, and that makes the other difference here in British Columbia in particular, is the timber is owned by the people of British Columbia. Obviously, there have been some changes in terms of First Nations, UNDRIP, the United Nations mandate for Indigenous people and access to the land. That so between the First Nations and the BC government, they control the timber, they own it, and that means you and me, the people, do as well. So then the government policy in the mid-'60s, and probably in the early 60s already, had made a mandate that you could not leave any of the wood that you did not utilize in the bush, because that's what would happen. The sawmills be in the bush, a lot of sawdust and shavings, not so much shavings there, but sawdust in particular, and waste from the timber that had been cut was left in the bush. And so the mandate was that there must be, to attract pulp mills in particular, a commitment was made for large amounts of timber for pulp mills, and it attracted capital here for all the pulp mills that are still here now and in other places. There was also another policy of close utilization that meant that if you had access to crown timber, you must then, any of the timber that not would become lumber, they call it close utilization, must be turned into chips. So you must then have, as the small mill, you must have debarking ability and chipping facility. Well, that would cost 10 times more than the mill is worth. So a lot of the smaller operators started selling out the timber allocations to the larger mills. And so when I came here, it became consolidation of fewer of the bigger mills. And then the planer road that used to be there, the planer mills that were there moved usually to the BCR or sold out and consolidated in some of the newer companies, including the mill that I called Netherlands Overseas, that were some people with a Dutch background, I didn't know them, already had different mills in different places, and they decided to acquire some of the smaller mills here, build a large mill in the BCR side. So that was the change in policy of consolidation. And what companies mainly did is they made dimension lumber, primarily for the U.S. market.
Right.
So that's what happened then. There was really not much value-added manufacturing or further manufacturing, and there was more of that was done down the coast, where obviously the mixture of species that you had is Douglas fir, you had cedar, balsam fir to a certain extent, and some of the other species that were being used for further manufacturing. So there was already extensive volume of secondary manufacturing down the coast, but not so much up north. And so that's what started when I started in my operation virtually 50 years ago. With nothing and looking at remanufacturing. What is remanufacturing? I would buy low-grade, economy-grade lumber that may be from a 2x4 to a 2x12. I would split it into 2x4s and then cross-cut it to take the defects out and then upgrade the lumber into other products. The problem with it was that we would end up with too many short pieces.
Yeah.
And other people had tried it and they had no place to go. Fortunately, again, my experience, I had been exposed to finger jointing, but it's finger jointing where you glue two pieces together like this, male, female, you apply glue and you put them together. And so when I started that process, I was the first one to do that in Canada. Everybody said, oh, that will never work, and is firewood glued together. Well, today we probably get 50% more in terms of price for our product versus the other. Why? Because the competitive products, studs in particular, why is it called studs? Well, studs are for compression. And structurally is for longer length.
Yeah.
So I made studs, and studs are used in wall construction, and crook and twist is very important. And so where we have 4 or 5 joints, so it's straighter. And so there is a benefit. It took a while, but I built the market for it. In particular in the southern United States. Why the southern United States is because even now, and the species there, southern yellow pine. By the growing southern yellow pine, is that nature? No,
Very
it's planted there
fast-growing.
on the old cotton fields. And the tendency is that the wood is small and lots of twists, lots of curve. I always say you have to drill it before you nail it.
Yeah.
So and so that's where I created a niche, and still today we're quite successful in doing that. So that kind of was that, and then it also became obvious that there was so much competition for the currency for interaction in the industry between primaries, the ones that have timber, and secondaries that in most cases don't. That has to be what would incent them to deal with the secondary manufacturer is, well, other than price, so it became obvious that we needed to have access to timber, and so I was quite involved in creating an organization in the mid-90s, then already started that in the late 80s, but in the mid-90s put it off the ground is BC Council of Value-Added Wood Manufacturers.
Right on.
And we had up to 8 associations, 800 companies around the province. And I thought that be the direction of the industry. But we needed to have access to timber. So the government then made available to that group a small business program, which was about 20% of the annual allowable cut, or the AAC. That worked well, but obviously was not being promoted by the larger primaries. They didn't like this because, obviously put leverage on them to add more value to the lumber that we manufactured.
Right.
So that has always been an issue, and unfortunately, because of again government policy, that in early 2000, we made very major changes. That was under the BC Liberals with Gordon Campbell in particular, that the appurtency was removed. That means appurtency is the concept of we should manufacture lumber where the timber grows. And then the other concept is to add more social and economic value to the resource, but that applies to not only timber, but it applies to all the resources that we have. Mm-hmm. It only makes sense, and I was have always been involved in that and always promoted that. So as the industry then got bigger, it consolidated more, it got too big, and too much of the timber of the annual allowable cut, the AAC, was controlled by too few companies. We still see that today, and not talking about what's happening today, but in a number of things happened in the late 80s and in the 90s. More consolidation. There used to be that any time tenure, which is the renewable access to timber that some companies have, tenure, was very difficult to come by, and they controlled most of it. But if they sold tenure from one company to another, there would be a clawback of about 10 or 15%. That was also eliminated, unfortunately, in 2002. And then the incentive...
So, sorry, the clawback would be they would still have to give the old tenure holder a certain percentage of the revenue? Is that how it would work? Or
how it would work is saying that I have, say, 500,000 cubic meters of tenure, that if I would sell it to somebody else, then 15% of that volume, or 10%, I forget what it was, would go back to the Crown.
Oh, back to the Crown. Okay.
Yeah. So and so it created a disincentive in a way for interacting. Mm-hmm. So and so government policy has always played a major role. I'm critical of that in the sense that what we do in BC is that every 4 years we got an election, approximately. Mm-hmm. And then we go either to the left or we go to the right. And then everybody has different policies or no policy.
Yeah.
And then we appoint a new Minister of Forest, and that is usually, respectfully, people that have no experience in the forest industry. Mm-hmm. And then after they kind of have figured it all out and kind of, I always say, tongue-in-cheek a little bit, is by the time they find out where to hang their coat and where the washroom is, they change them again every 2 years. So not conductive for good longer term. What you need in the forest industry and British Columbia, you need even still today, long-term strategy. We have to look forward 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Mm-hmm. And if we don't do that, and the same applies to today, where now, obviously the amount of... Let me add another thing to it, just to make sure before I get to the tenure today and the annual allowable cut and the effects of First Nations, is that in the early 80s, we had a case east of Prince George in the Barron Rivers.
Barron clear cut?
Yeah, of spruce beetle cut. Mm-hmm. and it was a massive volume of even the people would say from the sky, from satellites, you would be able to see the size of the clear cut.
Yeah.
And so they had to recover as much of that fiber as they could, is they pushed up the annual allowable cut, and everybody was going in there and doing that. They did. But I did also trying to get access to, I set up a little sawmill right in the middle of it, which was very good for us, very good. I took the wood that somebody else didn't want. And so that worked well for us, helped me in building my company. And then the other part, obviously, that happens going forward in terms of the annual allowable cut, and what happened to the timber is we had a blowdown of fiber in Tweedsmuir Park that then became the pine beetle epidemic that spread virtually throughout the interior of British Columbia and probably reduced the tenure, the timber in the region by at least 30 to 35%. The other part that happened to it is that from that point forward, again, we pushed up the volume of the AAC, which usually was the annual allowable cut. For those people that are watching us that may not necessarily fully understand it respectfully, the annual allowable cut is basically saying how can we, if we can maintain, say, 60 million cubic meters annually, how do we maintain that in the long term so we can then harvest in that area so that, if it takes 100 years to grow a tree, then we want to make sure we plant at least 2 or 3 of them so we maintain that volume. So we did that, but then when things happen like the spruce beetle or the pine beetle had a major effect on the annual allowable cut. That started in probably the say 2000 in particular, when it got to the attention of everybody, where the volumes involved were so significant that for people to put a picture around this, that if we use in the province 60 million cubic meters annually, the amount of timber affected by the pine beetle epidemic was 1 billion cubic meters.
Wow.
16 years of annual allowable cut. It became obvious. The benefit, though, in one way is that, and you guys probably know about this, is that spruce tends to, the survival and the usability of spruce is much shorter than pine. So it tends to, for within 3 or 4 years, the rod and suitability for further manufacturing, extracting economic value from that is limited. Whereas the pine, it could be 10 to 15 years, and that's what we did. So for a long term, we had major volumes of pine beetle, but is obvious that it would affect the annual allowable cut, which it did. It brought it down.
Well, it boosted it a lot in the short term, but then in the
Correct.
long term, it decreased the sustainability of the
Correct.
AAC.
So that has an effect on us now, and then the other things that obviously has global warming, forest fires, especially 1819, where we have gradually had more fires attacking more and more of our annual allowable cut, or the tenure or the timber left. Another issue there is obviously we leave too much of the timber behind, and that so bio
Energy.
Is becoming one of the topics that is very much in discussion now. We have to do more with it, but we have to go further. Now, the other things that have happened is obviously considerations like those, but also in terms of caribou and the effect of wildlife on our land base. So our working land base is about 22 million hectares, about the same as Sweden actually. But the Swedes is a good example for us. They do more, their ownership structure much different than ours. Most of the timber there is private. Government has, relatively speaking, a small portion of it there, and different other forms have. They do a better job of replanting, but also tending to the working forest thinning. In some cases, maybe 3 cycles that they go through. We don't do any of that. So then being said, add to that the United Nations Declaration of the
UNDRIP.
UNDRIP.
Yeah.
And UNDRIP it's a notion of the United Nations putting it forward globally, really, is saying that the indigenous people should have access, or at least being involved, or must give consent to what happens to the land that has no treaty, or in some cases may even have treaties relating to it. So has created a whole different set of issues as well, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later. So what has now happened is that the pine beetle has been dealt with, but it created a lot of cheap timber for a lot of people because there was so much of it around, and so
and a lot of incentive to get to the timber as quickly as possible, just
exactly
before it becomes less valuable.
Instead of doing the green wood, rather work with that. Now the other problem with it has been all along is that we ship lumber mainly into the U.S. market, and for the since 1982 in particular, we have had issues of access to that market and paid duties. But already for the last 100 years, this has been the case, where there were issues relating to that.
Right.
That has become a problem. So all of that in combination has put us into a position, I suggest, substantially because of federal policy in some cases, but also provincial policy, that we have not done a good job of looking at the long-term sustainability of our forest and our forest resource and the opportunities for further manufacturing and stimulating manufacturing. And so what we see now is that, especially consolidation, in my opinion, a problem where probably less than 4 or 5 companies control 85% of the annual allowable cut, is not good for us as a province. And so then the danger is there, when things go bad, they will make decisions and leave. Well, that's what is happening today, is that the shock is they will leave. So why? Well, a lot of the companies that own it are public companies that have accountability to their shareholders, and if they are losing money or keep losing money, and there is no foresight, at least in their minds, that will change, then the shareholders and the board of directors and the management teams will decide that they have to propose to the shareholders that they get out of certain regions where the economic viability of their operations don't work. That's where we are today. Or already were there in the post-pine beetle situation. And so companies like the major companies here, like West Fraser, substantially have left, already invested mainly in the U.S. Southeast, in other parts of the world, but mainly in those. Canfor is now in the process of shutting down more of the sawmills, but and has left for the U.S. Southeast mainly, but also for in Sweden. Just was an announcement that one of their investment in Sweden, they bought another 7 or 8% of a company called Vida, which is one of the major operators in Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and where we are is that the forest industry used to employ 180,000 people. Today is probably more like 90 and declining. Then in terms of value-added manufacturing, after the changes of policy and politics, even still today, from where I was the founding chair and president of the BC Council Value-Added Wood Processors, 8 associations, 800 companies, is less than 25% left of them. If I look today at the landscape, I will get to the good stuff as well, so I don't want to depress everybody, but I have to just deal with the issues that we have now. If I look at it and I go look at the province of British Columbia, looking down the coast, it's declined substantially. It's a bit of a disaster. More and more mills are shutting down. We used to have 120 sawmills in the province of British Columbia. Today we got less than 60. And then in northern BC, we've lost a lot of sawmills. We probably will lose another 3 or 4 outside of Canfor. That is in the process.
Sorry, for the value-added manufacturing, do you think that's a downstream effect of the larger sawmills closing? Is that why there's so much less value-added? Because I've heard, the Minister of Forests and the Premier, they talk about value-added a lot, but it seems like it's been declining.
They talk about it, but they don't do nothing about it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So if I look at it now, at the province of British Columbia, Fort Nelson, we used to have sawmills, no more sawmills. Fort St. John, they're in the process of shutting down the mill, one of the ones that I wanted to buy. Then Chetwynd sawmills shut down. Mackenzie sawmills shutting down. Bear Lake, Fraser Lake, Huston, and I can just go down and down and down, and there's probably more, at least 4 or 5 more. Value added, pretty well all gone. There's probably 3 or 4 left, and of those 3 or 4, probably 2 or 3 of them wish they were not here. But
it's like if the main sawmill shuts down, then the value added doesn't have the supply of the extra lumber, right, to keep going.
And that's exactly what is one of the challenges. Now, the other part that didn't help things is that we have an industry. If we look back at, what happens? Too much consolidation by a few companies that can decide to throw in the towel and say, let's make lots of money on pine beetle, and then we invest it elsewhere and then say, goodbye, see you. We don't like UNDRIP, we don't want to work with First Nations, or they all say, we want to, blah, blah, blah. But obviously they've said, no, that's not where we want to be. And so, so then where we are is, how about value-added manufacturing? What will it look like as we go forward? I think we're still not quite there in terms of being, as we speak, Canfor is shutting down a sawmill in Fort St. John, one in Vanderhoof, and so they still have one here, PG Saw, and they still have Prince George Intercontinental Pulp Mill, PG Prince George Pulp, and then the Northwood Pulp. There's still too much capacity. At least 1 or 2 of them, at least 50% of it will probably shut down. And they are trying to sell those companies as well. They want to, and as I see it and from what I know, they want to get out of BC because they find it economically no longer viable. So, that then being said, you guys are students and saying, where is the future? I believe in the future. That's why I'm here. So even to the extent that I made Canfor, although I'm under an NDA, but so I cannot talk about details that relate to their financial issues that have been made available to me or other things that are private confidential. But I can talk about the concept.
Before I go that, I just want to have a little question about the value added before I go to the Canfor part, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure, clarify that you don't have a tenure, right? You only purchase wood,
correct,
lumber from the primary market.
Yeah.
So if there's one day that the entire primary market shut down, that means you have no source of lumber to come in.
Correct. Would affect us.
Wow.
Already has affected numerous others now.
Right.
As there is a fairly major manufacturer, value-added company down the coast is gone bankrupt, and so we see one after the other, and saying, but why is government not doing? They talk about it. So what you have in the industry in terms of access to fiber, either you're a tenure holder and you have enough tenure, or you have one tenure holder that does not have enough tenure and has to supplement it by buying tenure in the open or timber in the open market. And then you have value-added manufacturers that have no timber at all. And then what are we doing with the lower quality wood or the wood that we can further manufacturing? But
it's just all going to the pulp mill now.
Yeah.
Not only that, it's also being sold to China.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually say tongue-in-cheek, they send it back to Costco as furniture.
Mm-hmm.
So so what is the problem here? Lack of guts on the part of politics, first and foremost. And I've been fairly critical, and it doesn't make me, I'm not in a popularity contest, but I've been here for 60 years with my suitcase, my $20, 47 cents. And I believe in the country. That's why I came in. I'm not leaving. Mm-hmm. And so I want to be a voice of change. And so coming back to your question is that what happened to value-added manufacturers? But they have no leverage. Even now, we have mills that manufacture around us still, even the independent sector, where we would pay them for their fiber, low-grade fiber. We pay them the price for it, but they soon send it to China.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's much easier to sell to China.
Yeah.
And we can sell 6 months of production to China, and so again, lack of government policy is that at the end of the day, and that's what I have said, I've been outspoken about it. I have podcasting is a very amazing voice. It is an amazing, powerful media, and it's only at the beginning. It is exploding around the world. And so I'm not only podcasting about forest industry issues, but on issues right across the board. And that's the part that I like about it. It gives us, you guys, and me, I also podcast on the issue of the forest industry and crisis. And I bring these issues forward. And I say to the people, it's your fiber. Stand up, speak out. Mm-hmm. And so, but so far, what has happened in I'm not beating up on any politician or any party. All the parties fall in the same category, actually. So it then becomes a question of what are we going to do? Where do we go?
I'm so happy that you're here, John. Like that's one of the reasons we started this podcast. We want to have professionals from different fields to come in. Whether you think we should clear cut entire BC or we should, it's evil to cut down even one tree. The one thing about this podcast, this particular platform, is we don't push in agendas because we're students. We just want to listen to you, and then we're invited even conservation group to come in, different people, a variety of different, opinions to come in and talk to us.
I like that.
Because it's important for us to learn. And this is kind of addition to what we actually learned in university. This is like, from the people in the real world doing, in the trenches, rolling in there, actually making the changes and doing the things. So I just appreciate that you're here to even just share that brief history of the PG industry. I learned so much already. And one thing I really admire you is how optimistic you are in this very challenging time for the industry. That if you're purely thinking about economic perspective, that this is probably not a good time to come here and then invest money and then buying mills. Or
I don't believe that.
Yeah. So, now I just want to go down to this Canfor topic that, they are one of the giants. They were one of the giants up here. They have so many different mills up here. We have Canfor Theater just behind us right here.
Yeah.
They have swimming pools, and they established a lot of like operation procedures and how things is done around here. And a lot of smaller mills kind of follow Canfor's model. And they obviously not a single company want to open operating at loss for a long time, especially when they cannot vision the future of the business being profitable. And so I understand why people left. And then I really admire you, trying to buy those mills and then trying to save those people's jobs, maybe your own business as well. And then I just think I just admire that move. But we also have really lots of challenges that Canfor couldn't figure out. And then I just want to, they every time they shut down a thing, they always the public available letter. They give you a couple of reasons. Obviously, they always having hard time accessing economically viable timber. They're always talking about regulatory complexity, the high operating costs, the tariffs coming from south. This new 25% extra, who knows what's going to happen. And then obviously we're in a really, really low market cycle now. And I just want to spend a little bit of time kind of discuss each one of this reason that Canfor, at least, this is a public available letter that, you can just search them out online. And then kind of your plan of how to attack those areas, because Canfor couldn't figure out a way to do it. I'm really interested in your plan to how to tackle those problems, if you don't mind.
Okay. So first and foremost, this is the more positive side of it.
Yeah.
Totally.
In order for me to get to the positive, we'll have to see how bad it really is and why. So I fly around a lot, so do a lot of business in the United States, and we have a place also in North Sanet, so the weekends. Otherwise, I work 7 days a week. I did it for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I have to get physically out of here, otherwise I'm working for the company. So I fly around a lot. Every time, when I fly around, I always sit by the window, and I look outside the window, and I say, it's paradise. It is paradise. Be so lucky to live in this part of the world, not only for the obvious reasons, because we all watch television. Look at Eastern Europe, the Ukraine, and then the Middle East, and all the other issues. We are very, very lucky.
Yeah.
Now, the other point that we see, and even for you guys and myself, we got so much timber, because all we do is look out of there and it's timber all over. So what we have done in British Columbia from 1987 forward, we have made it mandatory to replant. Up to that point, it was government that was doing it, and they were not doing a good job of it. So when they made it the obligation of tenure holders that it had to be replanted, not just replanted, for every 3 that you take down, you have to replant 3. And the quality of the timber is different now. You guys probably know that, the research that's being done. So we will get to a different yield. So that's part we're doing well. So then the other part in terms of, I believe that to have so much control of the timber by so few companies is not healthy. We are now at the point that we can make changes. Our annual output is around 50 million cubic meters, but then we have obviously First Nations, UNDRIP in there, and I support that when, and God bless his soul, when the Premier John Oregon announced the intentions paper that said to, and I was there at the meeting when he did to Kofi in 2019, April 2019, that industry must pay more attention on First Nations. We must be more sensitive about old growth forest, and then we must work on stimulating value-added manufacturing. That was, and he had 3 individuals that spoke to that, supporting that. The one was from First Nations, the other one was from from labor, and then the other one was from industry. And not many from industry want to speak to it, but I did. And I said, and this is important, saying that what will the industry look like as we go forward?
Mm-hmm.
We cannot keep making 2x4s that nobody wants.
No.
And then shove them down their throats if they want them or not. That's when you get all the problems in terms of duty. So the model of the mill that I see is that a mill that produces 100% volume, that 50% of that volume that we manufacture in a sawmill will go up the value chain. 25% of the lower grades, 25% of the higher grades. That's what I see.
Perfect.
And then the other part that, and that would make a change, the other part is that we have to stimulate investment in value-added manufacturing. They had planned that, but the existing organizations like the Council of Forest Industry is not they like to represent, and I don't want to beat up on them, but I was the longest serving director of the Council of Forest Industry. I was for 4 years the vice chair of the Council of Forest Industry. I resigned in 2023, April 23, because I disagreed with their strategic approach where they were going. They're basically controlled by the highest due payers.
Mm-hmm.
But that creates a system that does not work well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I disagree with that. And so that I believe we have to look at the tenure system as it exists. And then with value-added manufacturing, you cannot ask somebody to invest. We have probably invested with all the companies in excess of $200 million. That includes the warehousing and all of the other things. But $200 million investing in forest industry is not a large, it may sound like a large amount, but it isn't. You must then have a reasonable expectation of access to fiber.
Yeah.
If you don't, then there is not a banker, not a lender and so I was involved in meetings between government, the NDP government in that case, between the primaries, Kofi, and the value-added sector. And I was part of that group, and every time I got in there, I know I'm the vice chair of Kofi, but I'm here as a value-added manufacturer. And there must be a reasonable expectation of access. You cannot control all the timber and then all the wood that is suitable for further manufacturing send it to China. We cannot attract then value-added manufacturing. That was one of the biggest problems. And this government, even the NDP, I'm not anti-NDP or BC Liberals or Conservative, whatever you want to call them. I'm simply saying that is the wrong way to go. You must deal with that. So now in terms of Canfor, is that they still control a substantial portion of the annual avocado. In the region here, probably between Canfor probably still has 7.7 or 8 million cubic meters annually that they still have today.
That's in PG or the Omnica?
And well, it is partially in the PG timber supply area,
PG.
and then it may also include Huston or the lakes,
Right on.
those other areas. But
Okay.
what I'm saying, that's what they have.
Right.
And so what I say, the time has come that if you're going to move your sawmills elsewhere, that is the decision that you must make. and your shareholders make, Jimmy Pattison owns 53% of Canfor, and other shareholders, and if they find that it is no longer beneficial to them to have investments, or because the economic viability is gone, then you're free to leave. But if you leave, you will not keep the timber. We'll take it back to the Crown and make it available to others that will invest and add further economic fiber or value to the resource. So up to now, the primary sector has actively opposed to making incentives available to secondary manufacturing sector to either get timber for trading or access to lumber. And that is one of the reasons that even still today it's declining even further as value-added manufacturers. And although politicians talk about it, but they haven't done anything about it. In a lot of ways, they don't appear to have the balls to do, to be very frank with you about it. But we've now come to the point that they have to stand up and speak out about it. Mm-hmm. And so that gets you to the point of, as we go forward, that the industry as it exists today, just making 2x4s to a market that really doesn't want them, creates a battle, but it also destroys the secondary sector, because in the process we became, by accident, being thrown under the bus with everybody else, because there is duties that are applied to lumber manufacturers now that, in Canfor's case and West Fraser, 17-18%. That will go as high as 35%. But value-added manufacturers like us get no handouts, no subsidies, have no timber or no cheap timber, and are competing with American secondary manufacturers. We still pay 14.5% as well. Since 2017, Brink, which is a medium-sized company, we have paid close to $75 million in duties, and another $10 million in bonding, and so.
What's bonding again?
And that if you want to get paid duties, then you have to put up a bond.
Oh, bond. Okay.
Yeah. So financially, and so an industry as a whole, probably close to $10 billion. And then obviously Trump wants to add another 25%, but that's somewhat political in my opinion. But the issue is this one. Do I believe in the industry? Yes, I do. Do I believe in the future? Yes, I do. I made an offer to Canfor initially to buy Polar. That's at Bear Lake. I wanted to buy the sawmill because I wanted to make a deal with First Nations to have access to their fiber. Canfor then said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to sell you that and the timber rights that go with it. I said, okay.
And that's a volume-based tenure for them in that area, or is it area-based?
No, and that's another question. That is a good question that you raised that. You're mentioning volume-based versus area-based. Is that most of the timber licenses and the tenure is volume-based. Mm-hmm. That's another problem that we have, because that if you have a volume-based tenure, then it creates no incentive for you.
Reinvestment in the land base.
Yeah, because why would you if you don't get the results of it? So, and it's another flaw in our system, but that, it has to be like you are like a farmer, right? Yeah. You will invest, and there is no question. Sweden is a good example of that. Their yield per hectare is probably 50% higher than ours, and a lot of the other things as well. So it's a good question that you raised that. So it was not volume. It's volume based, not area based.
It's funny. I actually asked the Minister of Forests when he came here to Hengda was at the lunch too. Remember, last year he came up here to UNBC and had a meeting with faculty.
The previous Minister of Forest.
Yeah,
not the current one.
The previous Minister for was the Bruce.
Bruce. Yeah, Bruce Ralston.
Ralston, yeah. And I was asking him, like, do you think things are going to shift in terms of tenures? Are we going to go more towards area-based? And he just couldn't give me a straight answer. He just gave me like a politician answer, we got to consider First Nations, blah, 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 but it wouldn't give me like a clear answer.
Yeah. No, I hope the new one is Ravi Ralston, I think. No, Parmar. Ravi Parmar. I had a very brief discussion with them, so I have hope. I will have John Rustad on my podcast, I think, on the 10th of January. I've been inviting him already for the last 6 months, but now he wants to come on my podcast. That's good. So, but those are some of the areas that I believe we have to change. We have to invest in the land base. We have to bioenergy. We have to deal with that. We have to deal with tenure. We have one government that controls your and my government that controls the province of British Columbia. But in addition to that, we have 206 First Nations that have to consent to any activity on the land base. That means that we have 207 governments of some sort that have to consent. Hence, it has paralyzed the industry because, again, as you can see, that if you have a sawmill and you have to plan ahead for roads, infrastructure, you have to know for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where is the volume coming from so you can plan. And that issue is not working. Obviously, among First Nations, they are starting to work closer together, but not to the extent that they have clarified the area of giving certainty or not reasonable expectation. It has to be more than that. If you want to build, one of my proposals, I will build a new sawmill in Huston. It would probably cost 150 to 200 million. You
Crazy.
cannot ask somebody to invest, and neither would their lenders, unless you have beyond reasonable, you have certainty of having access to fiber. But we have, the amazing part here, and if you guys are familiar with the Bowron, go to the Bowron, walk through there now today, you're going to say, I cannot believe this, but it's happened here because the fiber is coming back so quickly, and that's 40 years ago. And so the same will happen to the rest of the province. As long as we plant, that 1 for 3, for every cut that we cut, and the quality of timber, we will have the timber. But the problem now is that if we take down the infrastructure of the existing sawmills, and the practice has been for sawmills for companies to do this, Canfor is not unique, but they are one of them, that they shut down the sawmill, they move out some of the critical equipment so nobody else can use the sawmill and then become a competitor on the side of the timber side. So that has been the normal operation to work.
Yeah.
And so now we're getting to the point that more and more of the sawmills are shutting down. We are now, in fact, getting to the point that there is too much timber available and not enough operations, active operations. And so I saw this looking forward and coming back to trying to buy polar. They said, okay, we sell polar, but then you have to buy the timber with it. So I did that, told them that I wanted to keep polar intact, prepared to make them an offer for polar. And then the next thing that happened, the announcement that they're also shutting down Fort St. John and Plateau. Well, those mills are critical to us. We rely on those mills, and especially Plateau and Vanderhoof and Prince George to a certain extent, as well as Huston. So I changed my proposal to Canfor that not only would I buy polar, but that I also would buy Fort St. John, Plateau, and Huston. Now, Huston is an old mill, but the objective was to buy the tenure, and the mill has no value, really, if there is no timber with it. And so the question then became, how do you establish the value? And I had lots of people, you say, what's the value? How much did you offer? All this kind of stuff. I simply made an agreement with them, at least understanding that it's all about timber. And it's about the tenure. So that we will hire the most highest respected individual in doing analysis of that. And so we hired Industrial Forest Service that has been in business here since the 1950s. Rob Schutz, an RPF, highly recognized globally, and especially in Canada and BC by government and by industry. And I hired him and them to establish two things. The volume, subject to what will it look like every 5 years, there's an adjustment to the annual allowable cut, doing the volume assessment and including the clawbacks for First Nations. What is the volume that would be available? So we could establish that. And then
how far ahead did he project into the future?
To whatever is reasonable, but I believe that it would have been up to 2027. Because that's when the next adjustment is there, and the facts that we know already from policy, and that's what politicians are using, and that's what everybody is using in the knowledgeable side. In addition to that, that's what we established the volume and then established the price. That was the mandate that I gave them to establish the value of the transaction. He did that, and that's based on existing current valuations and the current values.
So that's for the tenure around the Polar Mill, or is it for all the 4 mills you purchased?
So what I did is when they put the other additional mills on the market, I had to then say, I have to bid on all of them because they directly affect us. Polar would affect us in terms of PG, but Plateau, which I didn't assume that would happen, would affect us in Vanderhoof, and then Huston. There's about 800,000 or 900,000 cubic meters of volume in Huston. I made then a proposal that I would buy Polar, Fort St. John, Vanderhoof, and buy the volume of timber in Huston, the tenure, and then build a new sawmill there and have that operation in the next 4 to 5 years. And the model would be for me and saying, okay, John, how can you be profitable? Well, we have been in business as a secondary manufacturing plant for the last 50 years. I'm sole owner of my companies, all of them, and I've been successful. There's no handouts, no subsidies, no cheap timber, in spite of it all. So I must be doing something right. And so I believe, and I would not put everything that I have on the line if I did not believe that I could make them successful. And then say, John, why didn't it happen then? That's a good question, because all the senior management team is changing, leaving, and the only reason that I can think of now is that the other one be a petty one, really, if that were the case, that after them not being successful, they certainly don't want to see this small secondary manufacturer with your suitcase and $25.47 becoming successful, which I would. That could be the one. Let's hope that is not the case, but have to ask Jimmy about it, because ultimately he makes the decisions. That's how it works in my world. If you're the controlling shareholder. The other one is because we believe that we have so much timber under our control that if we keep it long enough, then we can make a real profit on selling the timber. And I say no. If you leave, you should surrender if you were classy about it, because there is a social obligation to having a privilege of getting access to the timber of the people in this province. A social obligations. I'm not sure that industry quite understands that well. Maybe they understand it, but are not practicing. I believe that part is important. And so what I've said in a general sense, hey guys, that's what I wanted to do. I put everything on the line. I can't do it alone. And stand up, speak out. But do I believe there is a future? Absolutely. Will it be a bit of a distance away? You guys are much younger than me. I'm 84. I want to be 120. So I may be in long enough to... No, I'm just joking too. But
you never know. You might.
I may. So, well, I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. So so I will stay active. I stay fit. But I believe in Canada. I think it's paradise. And I believe in BC. It's an amazing province. We have the best location in the world of anybody in terms of access to market, and we have the best fiber in the world. But we have to spend more money on creating skill sets. I've been working on the Center of Excellence, I call it, a BCIT for Northern BC, somewhat, and that becomes very, very important. And then add more social and economic value to all the resources that we have. And I believe that in time that will happen. That's why I believe, and that's why, in spite of it all, I'm not leaving. I'm staying here. I will fight the battle. I will try to at least be vocal about it, to the public in general. I'm not beating up on anybody in particular, but I think the politicians have to stand up and learn as to what the problems are, looking at forward, bring together First Nations and the government of British Columbia, recognizing that if you want to attract entrepreneurship and capital, it usually happens with entrepreneurs, guys like me that lay awake all night and get this idea, and somehow we're going to force it out, but we convince capital that this will work, and all of a sudden these companies grow, and the opportunities are here. Location, we have it. Infrastructure, we have roads, railroads, airports, infrastructure, we have it all. Northern British Columbia. And then what I say to my friends down the coast, that if you don't think you should support the new political party, has no representation here in Northern British Columbia. They have 3 ridings in the Kootenays, I think, and then one on the islands off Prince Rupert. And I say that respectfully. But you must realize, and I say that to my friends down south, that probably 75% of their GDP in this province is generated north of Hope. And for those people that like young people like yourself and part of your group, is there hope? Would you want to go someplace else and there is no hope here? I said no. The future is here.
Right on. Just want to clarify a couple things, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We're closing to that 1.5 hour long. I don't know. Do you have places?
Where are we? How far are we?
We're like an hour and 27 minutes now.
Okay, good. Well, yeah.
But I still have a couple.
When you're having fun.
I know. I want to keep talking, and then
yeah.
Do you drink beers or anything? We go for a beer afterwards. Anyway, so those 4 mills you're purchasing, you're also purchasing some of the tenure in Huston, right? Am I correct?
Well, basically what you purchase is the tenure. The mills are only worth, if the mill is sitting there and it has no tenure, and it's worth so much a pound.
Mm-hmm. So when you purchase the tenure, is the silviculture obligation? There's a bit. There's a silviculture. There's a word.
Yeah.
like when in 20 years, like free growing
Free to grow.
liability,
reforestation.
Right.
silviculture liability, does that come with the tenure that you have to take care of their cut blocks now?
Well, what you should realize is they have an obligation to meet their commitments,
Right.
whatever that may be, and then if they have met their commitments, if not, then there has to be financial consideration given to what they should have done and didn't do,
Right.
and then. Obviously, if we're the new owner or the new tenure holder, then we will meet the obligations that we have. That's
Yeah.
a given to me.
Right.
But you don't go out and if they don't meet their commitments,
Right.
whatever that may be, then somebody has to pay for it, and it would not be the buyer.
And I just want to make one last comment or something. I'm not expecting answers for this, but as a forester's economy is one of the major components of the forestry, right? But as a forester, once we become RPF, you also, there's a code of ethical conduct you have to follow, and the environmental factor is a big one. And then, in school we learn about old growth, we learn about biodiversity, and we learn about converting the primary forest, whatever you want to define that word, convert it to plantation, which is a lot of people consider as a degradation of the forest, which is a self-sustained ecosystem, that would convert it into plantation. And then, speaking of the old growth, the government website says we have 20% old growth left, but after the old growth strategic review in 2021, that we have 1% of the old growth is, they call it big tree old growth, which is site index 20 to 25, and then over 25 for the last time 0.1%. And then, after 2021, we also have a court case from Blueberry, the EA decisions that emphasize the cumulative impact. So all these things, compared to back in the 80s, or maybe early 2000, the pine salvage era, there are a lot of challenges for the forester, because now they're asking, it's not just come up with the land and then do a little bit of consultation with the First Nation and go in just clear cut the land. There's so much more we have to do now. There's so much more the forester have to consider. It's really not. It's changed quite a bit, and then it's just, as a forestry community, we're changing really fast, and then a lot of people are not used to it. And then for students in the forestry school trying to become the next batch of foresters, I just feel like we have a lot of obligation on our shoulder to do some of the balancing, at least learn from all the values that what's important, and then how we can maybe somehow come up with constructive decisions to kind of try to balance. It's a really hard thing to do. Economy, money is a big part, whether you like it or not. And maybe just one extra comment for the Bear Lake is, there's a really famous court case this July that the West Mobility, they sued this injunction case that Canfor and Minister of Forest, which is in the Anzac and the Table watershed, which is right beside the Bear Lake. We have First Nations that literally just don't want any sort of logging in those areas. So, if I have time, we definitely would like to chat more about this, and how, all these, because we, as a forestry industry, obviously we're craving for access to timber. We're the money is so important, but we have to consider other values.
Yeah, let me give you to your questions or your comments, that being an RPF is a designation that gives you responsibility. I see most of the future management for industry, both in manufacturing, marketing, coming from that sector, of people that have a designation towards the industry in the future. That's how I look at it from an operational. And to have the responsibilities is a designation that you have earned, but not keep unless you're active, and but it has certain responsibilities. And I think it is most of the management in the industry I see coming from them. and to have these obligations in regards to social obligations, but also in terms of the resource, is, I believe, very, very important, because there has been a lot of misuse, and sometimes worse than that, and that would not happen, and that's one of the reasons that in your sector you got the additional responsibility, saying to management, I simply cannot endorse that, and I think that's a good thing. In terms of old growth, my comments would be, I'm not a registered forester, but I've been around it for a long time, is that I believe old growth went too far in the recommendations that were made. Although there is 11 million hectares of old growth around the coast, the coast area, 11 million hectare, and then I oppose logging of these massive timber trees that are so unique, and to cut them into 2x4s, although they would make others, I don't think is very good. But once it goes so far that simply because of age that we designate old growth trees that are about this size, and simply because they're 150 years or older, is not the right way to go. So simply what I'm saying, I agree with protecting old growth, and especially the obvious one, and down the coast, the 11 million hectares that we have set aside there, I believe is very important. And then to be sensitive to other values that may be in the area of harvesting and the timber, and maybe our annual allowable cut will be less than it was before. But let me give you Sweden as an example. Were 40, 50 years at the same place that we were at. They became then more involved in intensive forestry, replanting, rethinning, and using it like a farm. And so that annual allowable cut went from 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 to 90, and now is close to 120 million cubic meters annually. And they do not have enough capacity. And simply that was because of policy and direction. And I think NBC is uniquely different because of First Nations, UNDRIP, and all the other things, communities. I think people have to be more involved in it collectively, being sensitive to First Nations and all the other things. But you have to get together, because no matter what happens, if we have this resource, if we cannot attract entrepreneurship, that's the opportunity, and attract capital, then that's not good for the province, because it does not only apply to timber, but it applies to all the resources that we have. Being more sensitive to the environment is very, very important. And that includes having people like what you guys are being trained for, that have an obligation to meet things that are understood to be what we have, as acceptable practices in harvesting of timber. And timber management is very, very important. We have to do more on the land base. We have to invest more in the long-term availability of fiber, but it may take 20, 30, 40, 50 years, as you guys all know, gradually, as we assess it every 5 years. If we do the job well, it will increase gradually. And I think 40 years is not a long time. I had a sawmill in the Bower, and I put it there in 1983. That's more than 40 years ago. If I go down there now, it's just in time. We will have a forest industry. I think the opportunities are still there today. But to go out there and cut it all down, I have no regards for the environment or other values, stakeholder values in communities and all the other things, is not the right way to go. So it's now time for change. I believe that the people in general are motivated to stand up and speak out, and I certainly will speak out. And if other people like that, or industry likes that, or doesn't like that, those are my opinions. And then I'd be vocal in terms of politicians. In terms of what will happen with the mills, I have no idea. I made them an offer, and they have not come back to me on it. And I presume what the plan is to, if they hang on to it long enough, then they can sell it at a profit. I don't know, So, but I think the time has come for government to speak up and saying, okay, you want to leave? Nice having you, and we appreciate what you did, but the timber goes back to the crown.
I just have tremendous amount of respect for you to make this move. I've known people working in the Plateau Mill for more than 30 years, and I think they're going to shut down in December pretty soon.
But they're down now.
They're down now?
Yeah, they started down with the sawmill, and so now the planer mill is down as well. So they're pretty much down technically. So they, as you know, they have to kind of phase down with their inventories and their production sides, and the sawmill goes down, then the planer is planing the rest of the wood, and but technically speaking, they are down now.
Yeah, and I also want to make a point that we mentioned a lot about Canfor this time, and then, if Canfor somehow is listening, I do want to, if anybody from the communication department of the Canfor want to come up and talk to us, again, we do not care, who you are or where you're from. We just want to talk to all kind of different views and perspectives, and Canfor made a lot of investments up here in the north, and I understand why they're moving south, but I just want to hear their story as well. So I would love to talk to them if they're willing to.
And that's a good idea. And I'm doing the same on my podcast. John Rusted is coming on my podcast on the 10th of January. I want the new Minister of Forest to be on my podcast when he feels comfortable.
Yeah.
And the Premier. And, and I have had discussions with all the communities, with First Nations. We're close to First Nations right across the province. Have been for many years, to communities, labor, so I've been very, very active to be very open about what my plans are. I'm in a fortunate position. I'm the sole owner of the company. I don't have to ask a board what I can say, and all they can do is that at the end of the day, I still have my suitcase, my two clothes, and the $25.47, and hey, quite an experience.
Yeah,
but
do it again.
I believe in this province and in the forest industry in the future.
Yeah, and I appreciate those podcasts. And then we were talking about this earlier, that we have a lot of high school students. They graduate from high school, and then fewer of them wanted to be a forester or join this community anymore. They just they just don't want to do this anymore. And then I think the solution for the forestry industry is not less forest. I have somebody to come to me, and they're like, the solution of the BC forestry is to take the forest out of the forester's hand. True story.
Yeah.
I just do not think that's the way to do it. And then, you can, I just feel like we need more people, more young people, more innovation, more talents, more people passionate about all different values, and then dive in and solve this hard problem. I don't think the solution is pull the forest out of the forestry's hand.
No. And we have everything that we are more fortunate than most other people in the world, and that includes Central Europe, that includes Scandinavia, and all those countries in terms of access to market and all our infrastructure. We have it all here. Yeah. And but obviously this is a lesson for everybody, that we may have to make changes to forest policy.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's where the key is.
It's interesting time. It's challenging, but full of opportunities too.
Yeah. But it always goes the same. You have to kind of hit bottom in order to get.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been through
change.
it with how long you've been in the industry. It does always go in cycles, right?
Yeah,
so
it does.
I'm sure now we are in a bit of a low point in the cycle, but it's not saying it can't come back around.
No, and more so the other part is in terms of forest policy, and the province of British Columbia.
Right on. Any other questions from you folks, maybe, perhaps?
No, I
For
just
sure.
want to say thank you. The knowledge you have, it's very appreciated to be able to share that with us.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's we're all relatively new, starting out in our careers. So to hear from someone who's been through it all and is towards the end of his career now, it's it gives us a lot to think about and kind of how we want to pursue our careers going forward, what we want to focus on, and also all the potential that's out there.
And so I want to leave you with, my presentation. I could not be honest with you if I did not tell you about the challenges, but I want to leave you with it. There's an amazing opportunity as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys would be part of that because the industry is changing, has to change. And we have all the underlying assets are still here. We have an amazing land base that grows in immense quality of fiber to markets that are close proximity, Asia on the one side, Europe on the other, North America. It's a huge, huge opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Right on. Well, John, I just want to really appreciate, and Scott sitting in the background there. Scott and I, we sent the email back and forth probably 20 times and then try to get this thing happen. You're a busy man, so I really, really appreciate you spending the time to come and talk to us.
Yeah. I
And-
enjoyed it, guys.
Yeah.
Right on. And then we also want to give the C4 radio station a shout out. Without all these studio this podcast would not happen. We definitely don't have the money to purchase all these gears. So thank you to C4 Radio. And also this episode will be released. The last episode will be released before Christmas. So I just want to thank the amount of support and encouragement we receive ever since we started this project. And I just want to thank you for listening. And I want to wish you a very warm and relaxed holiday seasons. And we'll have more episodes coming up next year about, all kinds of different things. So stay tuned for the podcast. So that wraps this episode of the podcast. We thank you for tuning in and spending time listening to us chit-chat about forestry, nature, and life at UNBC. UNBC Forestry Club Podcast is a student-led podcast sponsored by absolutely nobody, but a bunch of students who are passionate about forestry, the outdoors, and adventures. New episodes drop hopefully every week, so stay tuned for more insightful conversation and inspiring stories. Until next time, let's continue to grow together, rooted in our love for the forest. Have a great week. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks, John, Scott,
Thank you.
Jack, and Adam. Appreciate it.
Guys.